National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 2026 NDACAN Summer Training Series. My name is Lindsey. I'm a graduate research associate here at NDACAN. Before I kick off our time together today, I just want to give y'all a couple of housekeeping items. We're recording this session so that we can post the recording, transcript, slides, any related materials on our website several weeks following each presentation. I'm going to announce their availability on the Child Maltreatment Research L or CMRL listserv, and I'll put that information on how to join the listserv in the chat. Most of y'all are probably already on that listserv. Please let me know if you have any questions by using the Q&A box. And speaking of Q&A, because we're recording this session, we're using a webinar format on Zoom, which means that we would like y'all to ask any questions you have throughout the presentation using the Q&A box. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a box with a question mark that says Q&A, and you can click that box to submit your questions throughout the presentation. And after the presentation's over, we'll go through those questions at the order in which they arrive. So we should have plenty of time for questions at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. Great. So welcome again to the NDACAN Summer Training Series. NDACAN is the National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect, housed at Duke University, Cornell University, UC San Francisco, and Mathematica. Next slide. NDACAN does 2 learning offerings every year. We have our monthly office hour series during the academic year, and in the summertime, we have a summer training series. And the theme of this year's 2026 summer training series is laying the groundwork, foundational skills for using administrative data in child welfare research. This series is designed to strengthen foundational skills necessary to conduct high-quality, impactful research with administrative data. We're intending this to be useful both for folks who are new to this area and also for those who are just seeking to strengthen existing skill sets. So throughout these summer presentations, we're aiming for each session to be useful and thorough starting point for conducting research on child welfare using administrative data. And this is just a preview of our schedule for the next 5 weeks. We'll be meeting every Wednesday at 12 Eastern for an hour. These are the topics that we'll cover. We'll start with an overview of NDACAN administrative datasets today, and then the following sessions will cover data cleaning and management, linking NCANs and AFCARs, handling missing data, and end with a session on data presentation and visualization. So today's session is going to start with a brief NDACAN overview and then a discussion of the 3 main administrative datasets housed within NDACAN. The National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, also referred to as NCANs, the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System, or AFCARs, and the National Youth in Transition Database, or NYDID. So to begin, I'll briefly give an overview of NDACAN, our mission, background, and the activities we do. This is our organizational mission statement. The National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect, NDACAN, promotes secondary analysis of child abuse and neglect data by providing researchers with high-quality data sets, documentation, and technical support, and encourages collaboration within the scientific community. Next slide. For some quick background, as I mentioned earlier, NDACAN is located at Duke University and Cornell University and founded in 1988. Our data archive is funded by the Children's Bureau and the Office of Administration for Children and Families. Next slide. We participate in various activities ranging from collecting and assessing child welfare data, ensuring and protecting the confidentiality of that data, creating documentation to make the data usable, licensing and distributing data sets in multiple formats, supporting child welfare researchers, and expanding the scope of child welfare research. Now I'll pass it off to Garrett to lead the next few sections on NDACAN's 3 main administrative datasets.
All right, thanks so much, Alyssa. So I want to say quickly, well, first I should say who I am. I'm Garrett Baker. I'm formerly a graduate student, now postdoc at Duke University in the Department of Sociology, research associate at NDACAN. I just want to say quickly before I get started talking about these different data sets, I just want to re-emphasize that this is intended to be a fairly brief kind of more introductory or higher level overview of these 3 Data sets, and also stress, and I'll say this again a few times throughout the presentation, that the NDACAN website has a ton of resources to learn or dive more into each of them in detail. There's recordings of past office hours or training series presentations. There's user guides, technical manuals, um, and just a bunch of resources that, so I encourage everyone to go to the NDACAN website. And again, I'll sort of mention that a few times throughout. I guess I'd also say that for the Q&A, I'd say also probably this session questions probably best suited to sort of broader rather than really specific technical questions or things about your specific project. Of course, we'll try to answer whatever you have the best we can, but more specific questions, there are, our emails are at the end of the slides, and there's also a bunch of emails for other NDACAN experts on the website, and everyone is pretty good about getting back to you if you have really specific questions about your specific research ideas or projects. Feel free to email us or any of the folks listed on that website. Okay, so that all said, let's start by talking about NCANs, or the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System. So NCANs is a federally sponsored national data collection effort, which is designed to track the frequency and the nature of child maltreatment reporting every year. Sort of main high-level thing to know about NCANs is that even though it's often used to generate national estimates, from a user perspective, I always like to stress that, especially people starting out with NCANs, is that you should really think of it as a bunch of different state data sets. And I say that for a few reasons. One is that states are not required to submit data to NCANs. They do so voluntarily, and so their sort of funding levels, their staffing, their general sort of infrastructure surrounding data collection, data processing, and then reporting really varies quite a lot by each state. And then even putting that sort of capacity aspect aside, states just differ a lot in how they sort of report or characterize specific elements of the data, specific variables, et cetera. And so, the sort of first thing I always want to make sure I emphasize about NCANs is to, and I'll say this again a few times throughout the next few slides, but I always tell people when they're getting started with NCANs to make sure you look at state-specific trends over time, if you're looking at trends over time, or just breakdowns, crosstabs or whatever by state, and look for maybe potential discrepancies or ways in which states might be changing things over time. It's just really sort of best practices. So there's two main NCANs files, the child file and the agency file. We'll talk about both of those here. The child file contains case level records. I've got a lot more to say about unit of analyses in a moment, but basically it gives much more detailed information about specific children, specific reports, maltreatment allegations, disposition services, related constructs. The agency file, on the other hand, we'll cover much more briefly because it's a lot simpler. It's basically just state level aggregates. And we'll talk about that at the end. So the child file contains records connected to reports of suspected reported child abuse or neglect. A report could involve one child or multiple children. It could be, it's just a report, right? So it could be unsubstantiated, it could be substantiated, there could be some alternative response or disposition, but it's just thought of as a report. The file also includes information on details about the maltreatment types, the alleged perpetrators, risk factors, services received, et cetera. So it's a quite rich data set, but it should be always remembered by users that it only contains information reported to and then collected by the agency. So something that we'll show a sort of visual or schematic for in a couple slides is to remember that the child file is not necessarily a child level data set, and by that I mean it's not like each child just has one single row, right? It consists of all investigations or assessments of alleged reported maltreatment. And so records are really best thought of at the level of each child on a report or a report child pair. And this means that a given child could show up multiple times in a given year if they're the subject multiple reports. And I promise I'll keep stressing this in the next couple of slides and give you some visuals if you're a visual learner. So the child file also includes several broad categories of variables. We have things like report, an ID, an identifier for the specific report. We have the date, disposition, the start date for when the investigation began. We have specific information about the children. So there's child-specific IDs, which will come in handy. And again, we'll show a visual in a moment. We have sort of basic demographics about the child. Then we have specific information about maltreatment, so the actual type, physical abuse, some type of neglect, includes fatality information. Then we also have some child level kind of risk factors. If there's any diagnosed disabilities, substance related things, those are also typically available as well. We also have information on caregivers. So caregiver risk factors, potential financial issues or substance abuse, services that have been engaged with, foster care, adoption, some type of counseling. We also have information about the perpetrators. So what is their relationship to the victim, and then some demographics about the perpetrator as well. And then there's a bit of sort of additional potential fields as well. Okay, so this is what I was mentioning about sort of how to think about the structure of the data. And I'll say at the onset that, especially if you're new to NCANs, I think the best thing to do is always be really, really clear at the start about what your goal is, what your research question is, or what you're sort of trying to investigate. Are you trying to investigate things about reports? Are you trying to investigate something about children? Are you trying to investigate something about the perpetrators, right? Because all of those things can exist sort of on different levels. And so having a sense of your unit of analysis at the start will make this part, I think, a little simpler. But so this shows just one example of how the child file structure can get complicated and should be thought about carefully. So on the far left here, you have one report that could involve multiple children, right? So you could have two children included in one report. On the flip side, you could have one child who is the subject of multiple reports, right? So we're not just, again, working with a single child per row file. So this is useful if you're thinking about potentially looking at repeated reports or report level patterns. But just again, make sure you're always matching sort of your question or what you're investigating with the actual unit of analysis or structure of the data. Here's another way in which the sort of unit of analysis or the structure of the data can get more detailed. For each child in a report, each perpetrator can be associated with multiple particular maltreatment allegations, right? So a single child report record may involve multiple maltreatment types and multiple alleged perpetrators, right? So someone who is reporting to CPS, they could say that this report is about a single child, but they are suspecting that this child has been the subject of multiple forms of maltreatment from multiple perpetrators. So you can get this sort of hierarchical or sort of multi-layered structure in a single report pretty quickly. And so again, I'll just say, this is powerful from a sort of analysis and detail standpoint, but again, you just want to make sure you're clear on sort of what you're studying. Then finally, another layer to be aware of is that a perpetrator, if you're sort of thinking about it from the perpetrator side, a perpetrator can be associated with more than one report and more than one child in a report. So you see here on the left, this perpetrator could be the subject or the subject as a perpetrator of multiple reports, and there could be multiple children within those reports. And so just with one perpetrator, you could have multiple reports and multiple children nested within those reports. So the broad takeaway here is that NCANS has a lot of really rich and detailed, the child file, I should say, has a lot of really rich and detailed information on the maltreatment, the child, and the perpetrator, and that you can get really detailed data at multiple levels of all of those different aspects, but you just need to always make sure you're not just treating this as a simple child level sort of flat data set without first understanding both your own goals and then what you're actually studying as a unit of analysis when you're working with the data. Okay, the agency file is much simpler. Basically, it shifts from these sort of case level child report, case level records to just state level aggregate data. So the unit of analysis or the unit of observation is the state. So you have 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. So you end up with 52 observations total. This includes sort of useful information for understanding kind of state level patterns, counts, summary measures, but it doesn't necessarily give you the same sort of answers or level of detail that you get from the child file. This is really if you're interested in sort of state level patterns. So some of the information you're going to get in the agency file includes information on prevention services, referrals and reports, additional data or information on victims that are reported on, which would be part of the child file, child fatalities, Part C of IDEA reporting. So this is, again, a sort of higher level kind of overview at the state level. One thing to plug here is that the Children's Bureau actually puts out a report which has these sort of state level summary statistics. And these are published annually, the 2024 report we link to here, very easy to find on the NDACAN website as well. It's also, I included it here because I think it's also useful, especially if you're just getting started with the data, to use as sort of a check against your own analyses or your own sort of initial understanding of the data. If you're, for example, working with the agency file and you're coming up with numbers that are far different from what you're seeing here, then it suggests that you may want to go double check the code book or your code or just sort of how you're looking at or analyzing the data. Okay, so next we'll move on to the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis and Reporting System, more commonly referred to as AFCARS. AFCARS is the sort of main national administrative data source on foster care and adoption, as the name suggests. So just to make explicit, whereas NCANS focuses on reported child maltreatment, AFCARS is directly focused on children's experiences in foster care, out-of-home care, and adoption. So AFCARS is federally mandated. It covers children connected to Title IV-B and E child welfare programs as part of the Social Security Act. States are required, so again, as a sort of difference with NCANS, where NCANS data are often a little bit messier and sort of more varied at the state level because there's not that sort of required reporting mechanism. It's different with AFCARS, where AFCARS has a requirement for states to collect and report data on two things. One, all adopted children placed by the state's child welfare agency or by private agencies who are under contract with the child welfare agency, and all children in foster care for whom the state child welfare agency has responsibility for their placement, their care, their supervision. Foster care data files, the FC files, as they're sometimes called, contain information at the child level. So again, a sort of difference from NCANS. Here we are talking about child level data. And these child level data contain information on demographics, things like gender, race, ethnicity, when a child's born, their experience in foster care. And this has a whole wealth of data. Some include removal reasons, number of previous stays, if any, in foster care, service goals, availability for adoption, dates for removal and discharge, potential funding services, and many others. And there's also some demographic information available about the child's caregiver. One key point I always want to stress whenever I talk about dates is that users should always be really careful in how they're defining entries, exits, sort of time can be a bit tricky if it's something you're not used to working with. Then the adoption data files contain information on the demographics of the adopted child. So again, gender, race, ethnicity, when a child's born, birth date, prior relationship with the adoptive parents, if any, the date that the adoption was actually formally finalized, as well as dates that parental rights were terminated, characteristics of both the birth parents and the adoptive parents. And then it also contains international information, or really just whether the child was placed from within or outside of the US. So something that is really useful to know, especially if you are a new user of AFCARS, is that there have recently in the last few years been some fairly big changes to how AFCARS is structured. This doesn't change. You shouldn't think of this as sort of a holistic, or that you can't possibly use old versions of AFCARS at all. But there's a few sort of key things that that users should know about. I will note as well that we have done some past presentations exclusively focusing on the AFCARS changes. And this will, like the rest of this presentation, be a pretty brief and high-level overview that just gives you some initial information. And then, if this is something that you think is going to be relevant for you, or that you don't, or that you want to learn more about, I'd recommend you go to the website. There's, again, plenty of user guides and manuals, but also some recordings of past presentations that we've done on the AFCARS changes. So an important shift is that there's a shift from the older files, which were typically referred to as annual files, to newer files that are referred to as the AB files. Basically, states submit AFCARS data in sort of two periods in the fiscal year, two sort of 6-month periods. The older annual files used the A and B periods for that fiscal year, plus they waited for the following year's initial period before sort of synthesizing and reporting out the data, which helped capture sort of late submissions, corrections, cases that had not been fully resolved by the end of the fiscal year. But that also delayed, typically delayed reporting a bit. So now the newer AB files only use the A and B periods for the nominal fiscal year. The new files then are, they're not conceptually different. They don't, totally change things, but there could be some sort of aggregate counts that are sort of systematically different right before and right after because of this sort of shorter reporting window. There's a few other sort of important changes to know. One is that the data elements, or you could think of this kind of as variables, expanded dramatically. The old AFCARS file system had 66 elements, whereas the new system now has 186. So you get a ton more sort of detailed information. We sort of show some in past presentations, we show some examples of what this kind of means, that there's now a lot more detailed variables and definitions, as this final bullet point shows. Some variable definitions change. And so, you can have some cases, there are some that are totally the same. And the sort of meaning or the underlying foundation of the data are not conceptually different, but you might have, a variable that had a few, only, say 2 or 3 different response items previously, and now has 8 different ones, or maybe they changed or combined or split up, one into multiple variables. And so you should just, anytime you're working over time with AFCARS data, you should just make sure that you know sort of when these years overlap, when this shift happened, and make sure you're plotting things over time and looking at, is there a jump, and maybe investigating that more to see if that's a sort of real jump that happened in the real world, or is that sort of an artifact of this sort of administrative process or procedural change. The other thing to now know is that foster care and adoption files are now combined into the out-of-home care file. Okay, so again, best practices for AFCARS, particularly if you are using these data across years. If you're only looking at just this most recent year and that's all you care about, then this will not be as relevant for you. But if you are trying to look at longitudinal trends or compare years, make sure you plot the key variables longitudinally, look for any jumps or discontinuities, and then go investigate those more rigorously. Always check missingness and crosstabs, again, by state. I will say always with any NDACAN data that you should think of it as state level data in a sense, and make sure you're looking to see if there's any sort of systematic differences across states and across time with AFCARS in particular. And then make sure you read the code books and variable definitions carefully. Like I said, that these did update quite a bit, and so make sure you know sort of the underlying structure of the variables that you care about. Okay, and then the third and final administrative data set that we'll discuss is the National Youth in Transition Database. This is often referred to as NYTD, NYTD. NYTD is quite different than NCANs and AFCARs. It focuses specifically on older youth as youth are transitioning from foster care towards adulthood, and it's survey-based. So whereas NCANs is centered on maltreatment reports and is, agency administrative state-based or county or state agency-based data, as well as AFCARs, which is specifically in foster care. NYTD is more of a survey-based data set that I think of as sort of asking, questions of youth about their experiences and themselves as they're transitioning into adulthood out of foster care. So NYTD data collection is mandated by the John Chafee Foster Care Program for Successful Transition to Adulthood, Section 477 of the Social Security Act. It's, again, unique because it's derived from survey-based data, and the goal is really to help improve our understanding of how well states are preparing youth in the child welfare system for adulthood. So these data are at the case level, but there's two files and something to keep in mind. So there's a services file, which I will say is sort of the, I think, less used data set. Typically people who are interested in NYTD are using the outcomes file, which is the survey-based data that I was just talking about. The services file is updated annually, and it basically just contains sort of basic information on all children who received services. Again, the outcomes file is this sort of survey-based, accelerated or staggered cohort design-based survey that I'll talk a bit more about in a second. So again, services is containing information on academic supports, career prep, budgeting, mentoring, health, education, housing, education, financial assistance, those kind of things. Outcomes data, you're getting things on financial self-sufficiency, educational attainment and homelessness, high-risk behaviors, connection with adults and social systems, access to health insurance, experiences with the juvenile or criminal justice system. And so NYTD can be useful for asking whether youth who are receiving the outcomes data, I should say, of NYTD can be useful for asking whether youth are receiving these transition-related supports and for describing how these folks are faring across multiple dimensions of sort of late adolescence or early adulthood. So states began reporting information for NYTD in October 2010, which is also a fairly newer source of data. Like I said, or at least mentioned a couple slides ago, the outcomes file, the survey is cohort-based with a bit of a complex structure that I'll show you a table for in a moment. There's a sort of initial wave for what's referred to as the baseline population. This is all youth who are in foster care who reached their 17th birthday in the given fiscal year. So it started in fiscal year 2011 and then is followed up with at ages 19 and 21. Again, for our visual learners, I think this is a useful sort of schematic, though can be a little confusing at first. This is a more recent, so even projecting into the future. For cohorts, you can see, if you look at cohort 5 that started as 17-year-olds in fiscal year 2023, you can see that basically 2 years later, they're followed up with at age 19 in fiscal year 2025, and then they will be followed up with again at age 21 in fiscal year 2027. So you can do that again, with the current baseline population of 17-year-olds, cohort 6, that's this current fiscal year, 2026, they will be followed up with 2 years from now in 2028 and at age 19, and then again at age 21. If you just sort of look through the diagonals going top left to bottom right there, you can track sort of one cohort as they age across time. And then you see in that top row, the information on youth receiving services. The services file is collected every year. So as with any data set, but especially with Knighted, I think users need to be especially attentive to the sort of baseline population and cohort definitions. Are you trying to track one cohort in particular over time? Do you only care about people who were 17 in a given fiscal year, and you're just trying to track them over time? Do you care about looking at changes in trajectories over time, sort of longitudinal modeling, in which case you want to be able to compare multiple cohorts, but then, again, just making sure that your sort of question or your sort of research or data goals are well aligned with your actual data structure and what you're sort of doing with it. Okay, and then to wrap up here, I want to reemphasize that the NDACAN website has a ton of resources, user manuals, code books, past slides, presentations, recordings that will cover each of these data sets in much more respective detail than we were able to get into during our time today, as today was sort of meant to be a high-level overview. And then in particular, I want to draw attention to what's referred to as CANDL, CANDL, which is a database of basically research or references related to NDACAN data sets. It's maintained as a publicly accessible Zotero database. The link we have in here, but it's also very easy to find if you just search online. And it's really useful. I always recommend to people who are just getting started with new data that they go read actual research that's been done with these data. I find that that's sort of the best, most intuitive way to kind of figure out what you can do with the data is to look at how others have used it and how others have described it. Most published research studies will give a pretty good, detailed, holistic overview of the data they use. And I think that that's often a really kind of simple, intuitive summary of what's contained in the data and how you can use it. So I encourage everyone to go look at the CANDL repository. Okay, so we've hit time for questions. My email and Alyssa's are both here. There's the NDACAN support email. And again, on the NDACAN website, there's a bunch of folks who are not mentioned here that are NDACAN associates, experts who are also available to answer questions. I also want to mention next week's topic will be data cleaning and management, and Alex Workassi will be leading that presentation. So Alyssa, do you want to get us into some questions?
Yeah, it looks like we have one question. Does Knighted include follow-up data on where individuals are living after exiting foster care, such as living with family, living alone, living at college, etc.?
There is some data indeed on living arrangements in Knighted at the follow-up studies at age 19 and 21. Yes, you do get some information on the sort of living arrangements of people. So yes, that is available.
Great. And that looks like the only questions so far, but please feel free to put questions in the chat. I've also in the Q&A and in the chat, I've put several resources throughout the presentation while Garrett was speaking about where to find various information that he shared throughout. Great. We have a question. Is the child-specific ID consistent for the same child across multiple reports?
Correct. Yes, that is one of the goals of that child ID is that you will be, if a child is the subject of multiple reports in a given year, you can ascertain that by tracking them through their child-specific ID. Good question.
Great. And then we have a question, how to get raw data set. Is there any eligibility?
Yes. So you can just go to the NDACAN website. There is not really any restriction or eligibility. If you go to the website for the particular, NCANs or AFCARs or Knighted, it will have more information on how to get it.
Great. A couple more questions. Are codebooks and actual variables with descriptions available to browse publicly?
Yes, they are indeed. NDACAN website will have really detailed information. Will have really detailed information. Yeah.
Great. And then this question says, I know you mentioned there are presentation/resources available about the transitions to AB files, but could you give a quick overview on how this will affect entry/exit counts? Do we expect for there to be a systematic change, or will this depend on how states report?
Yeah, great question. So the short answer, well, I will say we have a bunch of actual examples in some of those presentations that I mentioned. So I will encourage you to go look at those because we actually show some trends over time in particular variables and counts and by state. So to give again a quick answer, there is some systematic changes, but it varies by state. And so I think I think you really just have to be able to look. You have to really just look at the state-specific trends. But the short answer is that yes, there are some systematic changes as well as to variables too, because the sort of elements changed. We pull out a couple examples that show, not massive, but there is a little bit of a sort of discontinuity or jump in either direction. So yes, the short answer is there are some systematic changes, but it depends.
Okay. Then we have a question. Do any of the data sets have data on the state that youth reside in, given child welfare policies for states differ so much?
Yes, the data sets do indeed have state level identifiers.
Great. And then this question says, for AFCAR's data, you just submit a request. For NCAN's data, you have to submit a request and need to get approval. For NIDed, is it more like AFCAR's or NCAN's?
I might kick that to Andres. I believe it's more like AFCARs, but I'll let Andres give a better answer than I will to that.
Yes, it is like AFCARS, a non-restricted data set.
Yeah. Thanks, Andres.
Great questions, everyone. Feel free to put some more in the chat or in the Q&A. Great. Another couple questions. For the data sets with state identifiers, would those be in the restricted versions?
I'm again gonna maybe kick this to Andres, but I believe the state identifiers are available for all. I can't think of a data set that would not have state identifiers. Andres, is that right?
I'm not too familiar with the contents of the data sets.
Yeah.
I think they all have state identifiers, though.
Yeah, I think with those, yeah, I believe I'm not aware of any restrictions in getting state identifiers, I guess is the shortest answer to that question.
Great. And then are the mentioned presentations that provide examples of discontinuities in the AB transition available online?
I believe they are. The most recent one we did was an office hours over the winter, and so I'm almost positive that's made its way online already.
I'll do some digging and see if I can put that link in the chat as well. Thanks for that question.
Great, thanks.
Did you talk about how AFCARs and NCANs can be combined?
I guess it depends a little bit about what you mean by combined. They can be combined in the sense that you can look at child maltreatment reports and you can look at reports and of maltreatment and foster care placements in a given year and even in a given state. I guess it depends a little on what you mean by combined.
Okay. And then a question saying, I saw NIS on your website as a data set. Is that still being collected?
That I do not know. I do not. That's the national study of incidents of child abuse and neglect. Andres, anything to know about that?
Oh, I'm not sure if that data collection effort is still ongoing.
Yeah, I don't believe it is. I'm not involved with it if it is.
Then I think this question is being addressed already, but this question says, are there additional restrictions for media use of the AFCARS files outside of the terms and conditions? Which I believe your answer should be in text form. Great. Yeah. So the question around additional restrictions for media use of the AFCARS files outside of the terms and conditions, the answer to that is the terms of use agreement, which is a PDF, which governs the use of the data applied to all researchers and are not different for media's use of the data. So if that answers your question. And then regarding the question around previous events, I'm just going to put in the chat our events page where previous event recordings can be found, including office hours.
There is a correction. We don't record the office hours. So office hours materials can be requested from the NDACAN data archive, and the presenters for those office hours can share those materials directly with people who request it. But in general, we don't record office hours, but we do record summer training series and some other events.
Amazing. Thank you, Andres. Great. Thanks everyone for all your questions. If there are any additional ones or specific ones that you'd like to reach out to us about, I'll put the user support email in the chat, Garrett's email and my email as well. And then Andres just put in the chat our archive of one special office hours that you can look at as well. But it looks like we've reached the end of the questions that have been coming in. Thank you all for coming in. Again, we have our next session next week, July 8th, over data cleaning and management. But thank you, everyone.
The National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect is a joint project of Duke University, Cornell University, University of California, San Francisco, and Mathematica. Funding for NDACAN is provided by the Children's Bureau, an office of the Administration for Children and Families.